Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jorgen Rose with Practical Farmers of Iowa, and joining me behind the scenes today is Rebecca Clay, so you might hear her voice. Thank you for tuning into this virtual field day. 85%, by some estimates, that's the land area of Iowa, 85% that was once covered with tallgrass prairie. And today, less than 1% of that original tallgrass prairie remains on the landscape. But as some of you probably know, some farmers and landowners are starting to look at how they can reincorporate prairie into their agricultural operations through the use of prairie strips. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. We're broadcasting live right now from a few locations, including the field of land and prairie strip owner Eric Hoien, just off of Big Spirit Lake. And we're also broadcasting live from the offices of Tim Youngquist, ISU STRIPS Project Farmer Liaison, and Ryan Schmidt, the Land Stewardship Director for the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. And I'm going to let each of these individuals introduce themselves in some more detail here in just a minute, but I want to thank them up front for their time and sharing their experiences and expertise with us this afternoon. But as you probably know, if you've tuned in for these virtual field days before we get to all that good stuff, I do need to do a few acknowledgements and take care of some housekeeping. So first, I want to thank our organizational partners for this event, the Science-Based Trials of Row Crops Integrated with Prairie Strips, or STRIPS project at Iowa State University, and of course the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. And I'll paste website links for both these organizations into the Facebook chat box here shortly. But if you're interested in prairie restoration, prairie reconstruction, prairie strips, on-farm conservation, land restoration, land protection, both of these organizations can offer a lot of resources and a lot of information. So I strongly encourage you to visit their websites to learn more. I also need to make note that this work is funded by a variety of funders. So for starters, this work is supported by a Conservation Innovation Grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And you can see here my contractually obligated disclaimer. And then this work is also supported by the McKnight Foundation and the Ceres Trust. So we really appreciate those funders for supporting our work. And then we could not put on over 60 virtual events this summer free of charge without support from all our great sponsors. So here's some of our A-level sponsors, and I want to thank them for supporting our virtual field days this season. And here are some of our B-level sponsors. So again, without the support of all these sponsors, we could not do events like this one. Just a little bit of information about Practical Farmers of Iowa. PFI is a farmer member organization, which means that our members and our farmers set our priorities and they point us where we want to go. And we achieve our mission of equipping farmers to build resilient farms and communities in many ways, most notably through on-farm research and by empowering farmers and landowners to connect and share knowledge. And so virtual field days like this one are just one of the many ways that we work to make those connections, share knowledge, and build community. And you can learn more about the many other great things we do, and you can learn more about becoming a PFI member and all of the associated benefits on our website, practicalfarmers.org. And I'll paste that link into the Facebook chat here shortly as well. So just a little bit about our event today. Here very shortly, I'm going to turn things over to Eric, Ryan, and Tim, and we'll plan on wrapping up right around 4 o'clock. And we will take some clarifying questions throughout. So if you have questions that come up, feel free to type them into the Facebook chat, and we'll relay those to our hosts here today so that they can answer them. If there are bigger questions that come up, feel free to type those into the chat as well, but we'll probably hold on to them until the end. We're going to have plenty of time at the end today for some Q&A. So if you chat a question and we don't get to it right away, we haven't forgot about you. We'll do our best to make sure that all our questions get answered. We're also going to be pasting a link to a field day evaluation into the Facebook chat box. So please click that link and take a few minutes to tell us what you thought about this virtual field day. We really appreciate that feedback. We read every evaluation that we get from these virtual events, and they really help make our programming stronger. So please, please, please take a couple minutes and tell us what you thought. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Eric, who is live in his field just off Big Spirit Lake to show and tell us about some of his prairie strips.
Welcome and greetings to Northwest Iowa and our 129-acre farm. As Jorgen mentioned, we're tucked up away in the northwest corner of Iowa. As I stand here right now, 2.5 miles to my north is the Iowa-Minnesota border. About 150 yards to my west is Big Spirit Lake, the largest natural lake in the state of Iowa. And about 50 yards to my south is Reed's Run, which will come back in a minute. We purchased this farm back in March of 2007 from the Lyle Poyser estate. We were honored and pleased to be able to have the opportunity to own it. It's located directly across the road. If we got a slide that Jorgen can throw up, it'll show the proximity to Big Spirit Lake. We're directly across the road. And then there's a row of homes, then there's a road, and then there's a trail. We're directly in our watershed into Big Spirit Lake. The map that's showing now kind of shows where our strips are at around the perimeter of the farm. We have edge of field strips versus in the field strips, and I'll explain a little bit later why that is. I think we have another aerial photograph that might show how the relationship is actually to the lake. But this one actually shows right now the actual CRP signups that we had to accomplish this, to getting the strips into the CRP program with 2 or 3 different, maybe 4 different types of practices to create what we accomplished. So in this photograph, you can see a little bit more clearly how the strips are situated. The black part is where the strips are, and those were burnt this last April as a part of our mid-contract management plan. Fire is a great asset to prairies. It harms the weeds, and it only enhances the growth of the prairie grasses. To the very right of the screen, if I'm looking at it right, you can see Reed's Run. The reason why that's important, the DNR claims that the Reed's Run has 17% of all runoff into Big Spirit Lake goes through Reed's Run. And you can see by the picture our proximity to it. Now, what we do isn't going to impact that 100%, but it's certainly going to have an impact. And that kind of evolves into how I came to be aware of this very real problem of water quality issues that is created all over the Midwest. At 32,000 feet flying over the Gulf of Mexico from Mexico back to Minneapolis, our flight path took us directly over the Gulf of Mexico and therefore over New Orleans. From 32,000 feet for at least 15 minutes worth of airtime, I could see the biggest brown mud puddle of my life. From 32,000 feet, I recognized that all that brown in the water that creates the dead zone comes from so many Midwest, all regional United States farmlands running off into small streams, tributaries, rivers, Missouri, Mississippi, finding its way down to the dead zone. And I realized that I might be a part of that problem myself. So that was probably the first thing that brought an awareness to how this problem really was or is. The second one probably had to deal with a lawsuit that was brought by the Des Moines Water Works a number of years ago against 4 or 5 Northwest Iowa counties, claiming that they were illegally polluting the waters of the Des Moines River and therefore messing up the drinking water for the city of Des Moines. If you're like me, you were probably upset and possibly fairly angry that even the thought of that was even made any sense whatsoever. But it did bring to light the fact that this is a very real and very serious problem that we have with water quality in the Midwest going downstream. Probably the third thing that really made me realize that there was something that we could do. There was an article in Des Moines Register probably a decade or so ago about this thing called STRIPS, which at that point in time was a new thing. And it was pointing out some of the impacts and the enhancements that STRIPS could do, for farmers. And I'll touch a little bit more on that a little bit later. And then I thought, well, what's better, to have the government come in and tell me what to do, or tell farmers what to do with their land, or to voluntarily sign up? I chose to voluntarily sign up and see what we could do. So consequently, we evolved into working with the NRCS office in conjunction with the USDA office to see what could be done. The very first plans about the STRIPS idea was putting grasses in the swales and at the base of hills, pretty much all throughout the farm. I don't know if I mentioned, I'm not a farmer myself, I'm a landlord, and I've got a great relationship with my tenant farmer, Doug Pringnitz, who does a great job. But I could tell that if I were to go down that path, he'd probably want to step away from it, and I'd probably have a harder time finding somebody else to take care of farming this property. So we kind of retrenched, worked with Doug, worked with Jim Shalley, who helped us out quite a bit, to design it so that they were edge of field strips, minimizing the turning that Doug would have to do, minimizing the point rows, and essentially creating the minimal amount of hassle to him. And in talking with Doug, he says that the strips haven't hurt him. He hasn't said it's helped him, but he said it hasn't hurt him. Now, we did take away 23 acres of land that he could farm, but other than that, it hasn't hurt him from what he says. And hopefully someday, maybe he'll start to recognize, and maybe other farmers will start to recognize, there's some benefits. The science at Iowa State would probably show a lot of the bugs, and I was just commenting earlier, I've seen bugs out here today I've never seen before in my entire life. There's got to be bugs that grow in these strips, that thrive in these strips, that are going to impact some of the negative insects that get sprayed for through pesticides every year. And so I think there's going to be some spin-offs on down the road. It's just a little bit too early to tell. When we signed up the strips for CRP, as I mentioned with those earlier maps, it was a real hodgepodge. We had to do about 3 or 4 different practices in order to get it enrolled. Tim, if you want to mention how that process has streamlined and become a part of the farm program today, that would be great.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Eric. I'm glad to be here, and thanks to PFI and to the Heritage Foundation and for Eric and everybody for participating today. So I'm happy to be a part of the project. As you probably saw through the intro, so my name's Tim Youngquist, and I'm the farmer liaison with the Prairie Strips practice. Help farmers and landowners like Eric around the state if they want to design and implement prairie strips. As Eric mentioned, over the last decade or so, this project has really changed. When Eric was interested at first, there wasn't a lot of people that had done this out in agricultural fields, putting prairie out there. So in order to get cost share through the USDA's Conservation Reserve Program, we had to put a bunch of different practices together, a bunch of different practice codes. We used some pollinator habitat, which is a CP42, and we used some farmable wetland and just a couple different practice codes. But
Tim, hold on. I think we can pull that map up. That shows.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that'd be great. So you can see, around different parts of the field, you've got several, I think there's 3 different practice codes here that are put into place. And it worked out okay, but it was a lot more difficult for folks to get enrolled in prairie strips. And as of December of 2019, there's now a prairie strips code, practice code through the Conservation Reserve Program. So each county in Iowa is going to have a USDA or U.S. Department of Agriculture service center that you can go to if you're interested in prairie strips for getting more information, and you can work with the technicians in the NRCS and the FSA to help you get prairie strips on your property. And that'd be what's called a CP43 or a prairie strips practice. Eric, I'll say if you want to keep going.
Okay, thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. That helps out quite a bit. Thanks to Jeff Asham for giving me his hat. Hopefully he's watching today. So at any rate, we went into this practice knowing that we signed up for a CRP contract, which we signed up for 10 years. So we initially planted in November of 2015, and lucky to get in the ground before the snow came. And it was directly seeded into bean stubble, which I'm finding a lot of people say works really well. So this is our 5th growing season here on the strips. This year, mid-season contract, like I say, 10-year program. Year 5, we had a controlled burn. And I don't know, have we shown that video of the or aerial photograph of the burn that we did not more than just a few months ago?
Yeah, I think we can pull up the aerial. Do you want to watch the video right now?
Yeah, I think that's more fun. It gives a little more life to it.
Okay.
And so this was just April 15th of this year where we burned the strips, and we have a previous field day that we talked about this more in depthly. But that's what it looked like not less than, what is that, a couple months ago, maybe 3. and then compare that to the field I'm standing in today. This is how thick and lush it comes back. Within 2 weeks, you could already see the green. Within a couple months, I mean, this stuff is already, you know, maturing out quite nicely.
And Eric, just so everyone knows, I am going to paste a link to that recording from your first field day in there. So if they wanted to learn more about your burns this spring, that link.
Great, that'd be great. So in year 5, we're pretty much done with any expenses to this program. Any expense that we've cost from seeding to seed prep to mowing to burning is all at 50%. So I've got some skin in the game, but not 100%. Just to give you an idea, for 24 acres, I think the burn cost was $1,000 total. So I spent $500. The other parts, the maintenance, the first year, from what the strips team and that Tim helps lead recommends, and I think works really well. The first year, mow it 3 times. It cuts back all the weeds because all the prairie grass and wildflower seedings energy goes into the ground the first few years. So it helps cut back the weeds and brings more sunlight down. The second season, mow it twice. Third season, let it go. And that we followed that. You know, that's what they say to do, and we did it, and it's just been amazing at the progress it's been. So again, especially when you spread those costs out over 10 years and to think about the income that we get over those 10 years, it's quite minimal. The other thing too is, you know, some farms don't have 100% great farmland. Every farm probably has some land that's not quite great and could be maybe considered marginal. And so this program to me seems to make such great sense, because why try to farm the hard stuff, or why try to farm the hard acres when it's just going to bring the overall farm production and income down? You know, put that into a program like this, you know, and get payments on it and let it do all the benefits that it does for us. I think probably the biggest thing that makes so much sense to me is all the benefits that come from these strips. According to ISU and their studies at Neil Smith down in southern Iowa, 37% reduction in water runoff, 95% reduction in soil loss, 77% reduction in phosphorus runoff, and 70% nitrogen reduction in nitrogen runoff. Those aren't small numbers. That's not 20 and 30. You know, 90% is close to 100% in my book. And it's just amazing of all the benefits that does for the person downstream, so to speak. That's one of the best impacts I can even begin to fathom. Over and above that, however, are some of the other benefits that are just amazing to me. The wildlife, the amount of butterflies, the amount of bees. Jürgen, if you want to play that video, that might show, and if it doesn't show great, you can certainly hear it pretty well. So if you want to play that video from the other day, that'd be great. Beautiful day out here in the strips. It's amazing to see all the flowers and bees. All the different wildflowers. The big blue stem. There's some Indian grass already starting to head out. There's some side oats, grama. Pretty amazing what nature can do. Corn's looking great. Blue sky day. And I think over and above, before I get to my last, what I like to think of the aesthetic benefit, I forgot to mention as tall as these plants get, the roots go down 1.5 to 2 times as deep. Some of this big blue stem I'm standing out in is already 6 foot high, and it's not even quite August yet. Imagine a 10-foot tall grass having roots that go down 15 feet. What that does is it creates almost a sponge-like type of atmosphere below the earth. So when we get those huge rain events, which it seems like we get more often, it soaks it up. I've walked in farm fields after a big rain and I could barely stand up because it's so slippery. You step onto the prairie grasses and it'll be soft, not wet, not any standing water, but just soft. And so it not only just brings that moisture up into the plants, but also too, that's what's helped create some of this rich topsoil we've had through the millennia. As the root system grows and then decays and grows and decays, I'd really love to see the study that's done through ISU 20 years out when they plow up a prairie strip to see what that's done for the value of the nature of the soil, the vitality of the soil, so to speak. I think that would be truly amazing. But one of the really neat aesthetic benefits that I never counted on, and this is what I see as the last benefit that I'll talk about, and then you can listen to somebody else instead of me. Because we live close to residential homes just across the road, and a lot of those people like to use our recreational trails. They'll go for walks, they'll go for bike rides, they'll take their baby in a stroller. They get to see all this stuff change before their eyes. The wildflowers are constantly changing. The ones that were in bloom last week are already out of bloom. There's some new ones in bloom now. The seed heads in the big blue stem and the Indian grass are starting to come out. And so it's a constantly changing environment. And it's been amazing to me the number of people that have said, Eric, we really enjoy that field. And so it changes the scenery, a feeling of a neighborhood. Perhaps some of you listening and watching today have driven through the countryside and said, boy, look at all those wildflowers. Some people could give a rip, but I think there's a lot of people that really, really care about it. And I think it's one of the very wonderful side benefits that we have as a result of the STRIPS program. And I'd probably ask all of you listening and watching today to not do STRIPS, but consider doing STRIPS. Just look into it, because it's an amazing program. Iowa State and Tim and all the people on the STRIPS team are there to help you. Your local NRCS office and USDA is there to answer your questions. And like anything else, the first little bit's a little challenging, but after you get going, it's like second nature. It's just, I can't speak highly enough about it. And I'd encourage any of you that if you want to visit with me personally, I think they're going to put up my phone number, email address, either one. Happy to talk to anybody that'll listen. So back to you, Jorgen.
Thanks so much, Eric. That's a lot of really great information, and I really appreciate you sharing all that. We have a couple questions here before we pivot away. I just want to ask you a couple quick questions. There was a question in the Facebook chat. Becca asked and you mentioned, your neighbors kind of enjoyed the STRIPS from an aesthetic perspective, but have you had any conversations or any luck convincing other neighbors to take some farmland out of production to install?
Well, I don't know if it's a result of this, but I don't think it hurt. Immediately to the south of us, we've got some land that the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation bought that turned over to our local conservation board. That got turned over to Prairie. That's just on the south side of Reed's Run. On the north end of Big Spirit, some people that I know personally that listened to a talk I gave themselves and another family got together, bought some farmland, turned it over to the Heritage Foundation. They're still farming that, but they put strips in along the most important part of that farm that had been producing all kinds of runoff into Big Spirit Lake. And I think they'll probably show some things on that later. So, if nothing else, we've got those two things directly in the watershed. And I know there's probably going to be some other people that I've kind of a little bit talked to. It'll take a little bit of time, but I think we're on the beginning stages of getting people informed and excited. Yeah.
And we should note, and we're going to hear from Ryan in just a minute about some other prairie strips very close to the lake, but Eric's strips are not, like you said, are not the only strips around the lake. So before we pivot to Ryan, Tim, I want to ask you a quick question. There was a question in the Facebook chat. Carol asked, how does the CP43 prairie strips practice differ from the CP42 pollinator practice? Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a few things that are different. So you're going to have, again, the same native species with that CP42 as you had with the CP43, but you've got a little more flexibility on the seed mix that you can put in. So you can either do kind of a 1-to-1 grass to forb mix, a little bit more of a balanced mix than what we were getting with some of those pollinator plantings. We've seen that's a little bit better at stopping erosion and then keeping weeds down over what we saw with some of the CP43. And then another big difference from just a farming operation side, the CP43 allows for prairie to be put around all or portions of the edge of a crop field. So basically you can make a frame around your whole field, and that can be anywhere from 30 to 120 feet wide. Why does that matter? Well, you can filter soil and nutrients before they're leaving your field, but also CRP is allowing these to be turned around on. So you can't drive on them, but typically you can't drive on CRP whatsoever. So here you can put these in areas, say you've got some end rows that are going up a fence line, where for those that maybe don't know about farming, you'd be farming basically right up and down a hill because you get to the edge of that field. And with the big farm equipment that we have, you need some space to turn around. By taking some of those areas that are steep and the edge of the field, putting them into the CP43 program, you can kind of create some more efficiency in your field by turning around on those prairie strips, and then you add all that habitat and the filtration and everything. So seed mix is a little different, and then they can just be applied pretty broadly and in a lot of different ways. So if you have more questions about that, you can go to the www.prairiestrips.org, and you can find more information from the Prairie Strips practice or contact info for all of us, or go to your local USDA service center and they'd be able to answer any question that you had about the CP43.
Thanks, Tim. We saw Eric there standing in his strip that, is a few years old at this point. It's starting to look at like what we might consider a more mature strip. So now I want to pivot to Ryan Schmidt, who's the Land Stewardship Director for the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, and we'll hear from him and see some photos about some strips that they have not very far away that are a little younger. So take it away, Ryan.
Very good. Yeah. So our prairie is a little bit younger, and we'll talk about that later, some of the differences compared to Eric's prairie. But I'm Ryan Schmidt. I'm the Land Stewardship Director with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation is a nonprofit land conservation organization based here in Des Moines, but work on a statewide level to protect and restore Iowa's land, water, and wildlife. So our whole mission is to permanently protect land and steward those lands in the best ways that we can. I want to focus on a property that we call Wallace Bowers Nature Area. This is still on Spirit Lake, where Eric is there, but more on the north side of the lake. Well, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the similarities that we did to Eric, but also some of the different practices that we put in place to help us accomplish our goals. And I also want to talk a little bit about our relationship with our farm tenant on Wallace Bowers Nature Area. That's really been a neat scenario to help us accomplish our goals. So let's go on and move to the next slide here. So just to give some background on where we are here. So if you look at the lakes map there in the lower left, you'll see the star on the north side of the lake. That's where we're at in Dickinson County. The north boundary of the property is the state line. So we are right next to the Minnesota-Iowa border. This land is 160 acres. INHF purchased this land in 2017. And at that time, it was almost entirely in row crop. So 160 acres of row crop land that we kind of had to figure out a plan and how to take care of this. A little bit atypical of land that INHF is known to protect, but we do work with agricultural lands, and we were pretty excited to be a part of this one. Let's go on to the next slide here. So starting from scratch, this property came to INHF through local and community concern about water runoff, soil loss. This is, obviously adjacent to Spirit Lake, and so there was quite a bit of concern about what was happening to this land and the impact it was having on the lake. So you can see a couple of these photos here. The top left shows what this looked like after a heavy rain. This was taken by one of the neighbors. We have quite a few neighbors that live on the lake shore right next to our property, and so they were keeping a pretty close eye on what was happening here. So you can see that the amount of water that comes running toward the homes and eventually toward the lake was quite a bit of a concern. The lower right, you'll see a large spot there in the crop field that rarely produces a crop. It was historically a wetland area that wasn't a very profitable part of the farm. So we're working actually as we speak. That wetland is being restored right now. So another fun part of this project. But basically what I'm trying to show here is that we had some water issues on this land. Certainly productive farm ground. But we had some things that needed to be addressed in terms of water quality issues and impact to the lake. Let's go on to the next one here. Okay, so once INHF purchased this land, the planning was quite an adventure, and we're still planning and thinking through this property here. But a lot of fun ideas, a lot of good discussion. We had a lot to learn. This was a new property for us. We talked with a lot of the people in the local area, people that knew this property, partners in the area, neighbors, of course, who were concerned about the impact to their homes in the lake, and then also the farm tenant, thinking about who knows this land. Immediately we thought it's got to be the farmers that have farmed this land for multiple generations. So that was a big part of the planning here. And really our top goal here was to meet our conservation goals of limiting water and soil issues to the lake, but also maintaining a successful and profitable farm. So we chose to pursue this plan as a way to find that balance between conservation and agriculture, and try to benefit both sides of that conversation. So we chose to do some prairie, but also keep the farmers on the land, and really learn from them about what are some of the ways that we could reach our goals. Okay, let's go on, move on here. Very good. So I talk about the relationship here with our farm tenant, and really I should say tenants. We have a father-son duo that farms the land, and immediately we realized that they knew this land well. They had been out there for many years, and so our goal at INHF was to get to know them, get to know their operation, and find a way to make this work for both of us. You'll see a note there that I said if any of our goals were to be accomplished, we had to be on the same page as our tenant. INHF could dream up the greatest plan. We could get all of our partners, including STRIPS and NRCS, but if we don't have a good relationship and good buy-in from our farm tenants, it simply won't work. We found that out early, and thankfully it's been a wonderful relationship with our tenants. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot about what they do and kind of where they come from, and why they do what they do. So it's been a good thing. I learned that doing more listening than talking is a good thing sometimes. So I wanted to listen to what they did, learn about their operation, but I also wanted to share with them, where I come from and who Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation is all about. So I would say that both sides of this relationship have learned a lot. It's been educational. It's been a lot of fun, and we're all learning a lot. This photo here is our tenant Jake. Actually, at a field day last summer. We did a field day in partnership with some of our partners up there in the lakes area to bring some folks out and look at the land, which is where I wish I could be out there on the land today, showing you around a little bit, but this is the best we could do today. So maybe someday we'll get another chance to get out there. All right, let's go on to the next one here. Okay, so this drone photo, I think, is just a perfect example of what we were trying to reach here. Obviously the benefits of Prairie that Eric talked about, we buffered the areas that were closest to the lake. We wanted to slow that water down, hold a little bit more water on the land, and keep our soil in place with the Prairie. So that buffer is right up next to the lake. Our farmers, we learned that they had a need for hay, alfalfa. They had been purchasing hay for their cattle prior to this. They were looking for a farm that they could implement some alfalfa. And for us, it seemed like a perfect fit. Alfalfa is a little bit more of a year-round crop. We got roots in the ground year-round, and it kind of limits some of the water issues and soil erosion. So to me, that alfalfa was a win-win. So that's kind of the second buffer after the Prairie. And then we still have about 90 acres of row crop corn and soybean rotations. And then the alfalfa is right around 50 acres. And then our Prairie buffer right up next to the lake is about 10 acres. So diversity on the landscape was what we were trying to reach here. Not only in our Prairie plant diversity and wildlife diversity, but also diversity in the farming operation. So it was a lot of fun to put this plan together with several of us here at Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, but also hand in hand with our farm tenants to make sure that it worked for them. Eric kind of mentioned, if this is unfarmable, if we do these Prairie strips in a way that's difficult to farm, it's tough to get that buy-in with our farmer. So we kept nice straight lines. We made it easy for them to get in with their equipment, and just kept it simple for them and tried not to be a pain in their operation for what we were trying to do. Okay, let's jump into the next one here. Okay, real quick. So I want to talk about the Prairie. I'm a Prairie guy. That's one of the fun things I get to do in my job is restore our native plant communities and wildlife habitat. So this Prairie, Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation seeded. This seed was sourced from Dickinson County, so we try to get as local seed as possible. And it was an incredibly diverse mix of native grasses and wildflowers. I'm thinking upwards of 75 species, I think, is probably what we were at. This was seeded last May, May 30th. So this was a spring seeding, and it was broadcast on top of corn stalks. The picture in the lower right shows the diverse seed mix there that we had going through the broadcast seeder. I always love seeing that seed in there. And then at the top right, that shows another partnership here with our farm tenant. This is the farmer helping us do the establishment mowings in the first growing season of this Prairie to keep the weeds down and help get our Prairie seed established. So I will mention too that our Eric talked about using CRP as the program to implement his prairie strips. We chose a little bit different program called EQIP, and that's also an NRCS USDA program. We had such a diversity of things that we wanted to do on this property that EQIP allowed us to do that. So helped us with implementation cost share of the prairie, but also it's helping us with the wetland restoration that I mentioned earlier. It's helping us pay for cover crops and no-till that our farmers are doing out there. And also we've initiated some water quality monitoring on several points in the farm that help us to understand if our prairie buffers and strips are working, and if the alfalfa idea is working. So so that's kind of a neat suite of programs that was offered through EQIP, and that's a program that your local county USDA office could help you better understand. So
Right.
yeah, go ahead.
So I just want either you or maybe Tim could fill in here to talk a little bit about the differences between EQIP and CRP, because they're, especially in terms of how they pay farmers, they're pretty different. So maybe you or Tim could speak to that. I don't know if you want to take a stab first, and then maybe we can turn it over to Tim.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in there. I think to me the biggest thing was that CRP, and I think Eric mentioned this, CRP offers an annual payment, and generally it's a 10 or 15-year contract. So they help with some cost share for implementation of the practice, but also, the landowner or farmer receives an annual payment through CRP. EQIP, we don't receive an annual payment, but they pay for implementing the practice. So they're helping to pay for the prairie seed. They're helping to pay for cover crop seeding in the no-till practice. But once that initial payment has been made for implementation, we won't receive an annual payment. So that's to me the first big thing that's very different. And also, like I said, the diversity of programs through EQIP is quite a bit more than CRP. CRP is pretty focused in its goals. EQIP has just quite a range of practices that are available. But Tim, go ahead if you have anything else to add there.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, you really kind of nailed it there. I guess the big thing that just from the economic side of it is the annual payment that you're going to get with the CRP versus a one-time establishment payment for EQIP. And then just the EQIP is going to be more of almost kind of a whole farm program where you can get into a lot of different things, where something like the CP43 is only going to be paying for the land taken out of production from the prairie strip. So yeah, I think Ryan, you summarized it perfectly.
And Tim, will that CP43, will that prairie strips CRP practice, that will also pay for some of the implementation costs, correct?
Yep. So that'll pay somewhere between 50 to 90% of the implementation costs. So that'd be seed, that'd be site prep, that'd be all those things. Then you're going to be able to also receive payment for doing mowings and doing burning and things like that. So like Eric mentioned, to have some folks come out and do a burn here earlier this year, the USDA will pay 50% of that practice or of that field operation. So there is a little bit of additional money there for maintenance, and then that's going to be like a 10-year contract for the CRP.
Yeah. So CRP rental rates are based largely on soil quality, soil ratings.
Yep. So the rental rate is going to be based on a county-wide rental average, and then it'll be boiled down from there to whatever the 3 best soil types are on that farm, not specifically say in the area that you're converting to prairie, but just the 3 best soil types on that field. That's what the rental rate's going to be based off of. So it's pretty fair, just pretty even with cash rent in your area.
Yeah. And EQIP payment rates are based on kind of an average 50 to 75% cost of whatever practice you're trying to install. So those are two options. There's also the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, which is probably more similar to EQIP than it is to CRP, and that program is meant for kind of whole farm systems of conservation and kind of paying farmers who are already doing good work. So that's another program you may have heard of. But I get questions about that a lot. I just wanted to clarify because the acronym soup gets.
Yeah, and the CSP, I guess the biggest difference with that, the CSP program is that money is going to go to the operator or whoever is renting the land. I mean, that just kind of getting lost in the weeds, but just for tenants or for operators out there, the CSP program can be a valuable thing to look into.
All right, Ryan, I'm sorry to interrupt. We can turn it back over to you now.
Oh, that's good stuff. You're exactly right. Sometimes these programs can be a little bit confusing and overwhelming. And I would say, just from my experience working with landowners and farmers, is ask questions. Go to your local office, ask lots of questions, and try to get the best understanding of these programs that you can, because certain programs may fit your farm better than others. Okay, let's jump into the next slide here. Now that we're back to the PowerPoint. Okay, so I'll just finish up with a couple other photos here. We're still in the early phases of this. Like I said, we purchased this land in 2015. We really didn't get started on these practices until 2019. So still early on, plenty of work to do out there. Still have yet to see what the long-term results are of some of the practices that we've done there. But we do really believe that, this could be, a model or a showing of how conservation and agriculture can work together to accomplish the goals of both sides. So the drone photo on the left here shows our prairie strip. You can see the road in the upper part of the photo along the homes, and then the alfalfa in the bottom right. The prairie is still coming along in the second growing season. We mowed it once this summer already, and starting to see some species pop up, but still takes some time, and we're exercising our patience here and trying to help this prairie get established. The small photo there is a prairie wildflower called showy tick trefoil that was the first blooming plant that I found out there actually in the first growing season last summer. So whenever you can find a blooming wildflower in the first growing season, it's always pretty exciting, because sometimes it's a challenge to find anything out there amongst the weeds. But in these early prairie plantings, don't be alarmed early on. These prairies take time to establish. Do your mowing. Just give them some time, and like Eric was saying, well, once you get that first burn on there, things can really change for the better with your prairie planting. So we're being patient. We're having a lot of fun with this one, and we're looking forward to what the water quality monitoring shows out here on the land, and hoping that some of the things that we're putting in place here on the land are gonna give us the results that we're all shooting for, to better not only this piece of property, but the lake and the people who live on the lake. That's really what this is all about, the bigger picture here. So we're excited for this one. If anybody has any questions specifically about this property, Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, and the work that we do, please don't hesitate to reach out to me after this presentation here. I'd be happy to talk anytime.
Great, thank you so much, Ryan. So we have about 12 minutes. I think that Eric is going to show us just a couple plants, and then we got a few questions. So Eric, are you ready to show us some of the flowers in bloom in your prairie strips?
Yep. Can you flip the camera around, or do I need to flip it around? You don't want to see me, do you?
I think you're gonna have to flip it around on your end.
Okay. Just walk through the prairie, got big blue stem or turkey foot. You can see how there's 3, easy to call turkey foot. We got some wild bergamot. We got pale prairie coneflower, the yellow ones in the distance there. Don't look at the thistles, please. Don't look at the thistles. I don't know. I can't see it because I got a different vantage point, but that's rattlesnake master. That's one of the plants that Lydia and I both particularly care for. It just, as I walk through, I was scaring up all kinds of bugs, all kinds of butterflies. I can always see at least 10 different butterflies from any one vantage point. There's another flower that I can't tell for sure what it is. Some Indian grass just kind of getting started. You can see the pollen starting to come off the plants. Here's what I'm walking up to. That's about 7 foot tall, big blue stem. I think one of the other things that I'd probably point out, the economic impact for us personally, sorry if it's scanning my belt there, is that me being a landlord, when prices were high for corn back in 2012-14, rents were also high. As corn prices came down, so did rents come down. The CRP payments we receive on this are actually more than the cash rent for the acres, so it kind of brought us better. It also was better for the tenant because their cash rent went down while the overall rent went up. So it was a win for both of us, I feel. Beautiful day out here. Take it away, you guys.
Thanks, Eric. So I got a few questions here. Tim, this is probably a question for you, and I know that these rules are in flux and they're different, if you're a beginning farmer, but there's a question about whether or not you can graze prairie strips. Maybe talk about that a little bit, some of the rental reduction rates, and those rules get very complicated, and I think people are really gonna have to consult their local offices. But
yeah, I would say that I'm not an expert on these programs by any means, and they can get pretty complicated. I know there are some kind of grazing provisions with the prairie strips, but I think it's maybe a 50% reduction in the rental rate for that year, something along those lines. So that would be one. I think certainly before you do anything like that, check in with your local USDA office or ask those questions before you sign a contract up front.
yeah. The CRP program is, historically what we would call a set-aside program. So, it's designed to take land out of production. So typically things like grazing or haying require some sort of rental reduction rate, so you won't get quite as much for your annual rent. There are some exceptions I know for beginning farmers, and that can vary by practice. So, like Tim said, you definitely want to check in with your local office. There was a question, John had a question about the milkweed component of the seed mix, and maybe Tim, you can talk about that generally, or Ron or Eric, you can talk about it in your specific plantings, what kind of milkweed you have out there.
I think I just want to jump in before we get to the question and say, for one, I'm jealous of Eric being so close to Spirit Lake and being out walking around through a prairie. Two, Eric, that was like some phenomenal species ID that you were doing there. So I was really, I was really proud to see just how good you were doing walking through identifying all those different species. And then just as a third, boy, I mean, Prairie is just, it's a really neat thing. I think the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation, it's like the perfect name for an organization, because something like Prairie, it truly is our natural heritage here for the state of Iowa. It's what was here a long time ago. And it's something that I think the more time you spend out there, just it's something that can really grab a hold of you. And there's just a lot of aspects to it, whether it's, just looking at the birds or the butterflies or hunting or whatever it's going to be, but there's a lot of neat things about it. Eric, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in one more thing on that. We'll never see Iowa or the Midwest be all prairie again, nor should we. But to me, this seems like to be just the absolute best thing to have the best of both worlds. We've got prairie, 10%. We got farmland, 90%. We're never going to see it all prairie again. We're never going to see it all corn again. I think if we and beans. I think if we do the 10%, 10% of anything isn't too much. And the benefits of it are much greater than 10%. I'd say that the benefits back out on all levels, in my mind, is at least 50%. So that's all I got.
Yeah, and to answer the question about the milkweed, there is a lot of flexibility with that seed mix for the CP43. So there's some certain metrics that you have to meet in terms of having the right number of blooming flowers throughout the growing season. I believe it's 2 flowers in the beginning, 2 flowers in the middle, 2 flowers at the end. I mean, it's really, really basic, but there's not much for an upper limit to that. So if you wanted to include, you know, a common milkweed or butterfly or swamp or world or any of those types of milkweed, there would certainly not be a limit to doing that.
And I can say firsthand that last September when I was out checking things out, we don't have a whole lot of milkweed on our strips, but there were so many monarch butterflies on different plants. It was just, there were thousands of them, and they weren't on milkweeds in particular. They were on a variety of different plants. And in my lifetime, and as you look at my hair, you can tell I'm not 20. In my lifetime, I'd never seen that many monarchs in one place, ever.
Very good. I may chime in too on the milkweed. We certainly, in our prairie seeding, we tried to get some milkweed diversity. You know, obviously a host of benefits from milkweeds. Certainly more common species like your common milkweed and things like that, but we really try to shoot for a diversity of milkweed species too. I believe that Iowa has 17 native species of milkweed, which a lot of people don't know, and not all of those are prairie species, but many of them are, and some of them are harder to get your hands on for a seed mix. But I know that we in our seed mix had at least 5 different species of milkweeds.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. We have just a few minutes left. I just want to point out that I shared the link to the field day evaluation again in the chat box. And so if you could take a few minutes and click that link and tell us what you thought about that field day, that would be great. We would really appreciate that. I also put Eric's email in the chat. So like you said, I think you can feel free to email him if you have any questions for him. And I also put links to Tim and Ryan's contact info so you can follow up with them as well. So I wanted to ask a question. Eric, you know, you talked about this, and Ryan, you talked about this too, about the relationship with the tenant and the importance of communication. But I know that one thing I hear from both landowners and tenants quite a lot is that those conversations can be pretty difficult to start. So I just didn't know if either of you had any advice on how to start that conversation with a tenant, or advice for a tenant to start that conversation with their landlord. I think, Eric, let you take a swing at that first if you'd like.
So I think it's just a matter of setting up a time to get together and visit. I always like to visit person to person instead of by letter, email, or phone, and just sit down and say, you know, I'm considering this program, and I don't want to hamper your farming interests in any way, shape, or form. But to me, it seems like something that would be a great idea. And like I say, I've been real lucky that Doug Prignitz and I have always had a really great relationship, to the point where when it comes time for different rents, I always say, I think we should take it down. He always says we should take it up. It's kind of one of those relationships. And so he was real agreeable. I suppose if I would have said, you know, I'm going to do it regardless if you like it or not, probably wouldn't have been the best way. And I think over time, I think he's going to realize this is a really great thing for him too. It's just probably not quite there yet.
Very good. I'll add to that a little bit. I'll never forget the day that we went up to Wallace Bowers Nature Area for the first in-person meeting with our farm tenants, and I was a little nervous, and I think they may have been too, just not quite sure what was going to come of it. But I think for me, the first thing that I want to throw out there is that I am not a farmer. I won't try to be a farmer and tell you how to operate your farm. But I also want to share my knowledge about prairie restoration and land conservation with them, because oftentimes they're not you know, as educated about the things that I'm really passionate about. So I think just sharing both sides, helping each other to understand the other side, and listening, like I said, more than talking oftentimes. Ask lots of questions and listen to the other side and try to find that common ground, and try to find a way to make it work for both sides. And that's what it's all about. And sometimes it is a challenge, but oftentimes if you're patient and approach it in a level-headed manner, you're going to find a way to get on the same page with your farm.
Well, that is a great note to end on. It is 4 o'clock. And so with that, I think I'm going to thank everyone for attending. I'm going to make one more pitch, one more plea to fill out a field day evaluation. Click that link in the Facebook chat box and fill out an evaluation. And I am going to wish everyone a great weekend. So thanks again, Ryan, Eric, and Tim, for sharing with us this afternoon, and have a great weekend, everyone.